A woman sits across from her psychiatrist, describing a dream from the night before. In the dream, someone had given her a piece of jewelry, a golden scarab beetle. As she speaks the words, she hears a faint tapping at the window behind her. The psychiatrist turns, opens it, and catches a flying insect midair as it enters the room. It is a scarabid beetle, the closest thing to a golden scarab that exists in that part of the world, behaving in a way entirely unlike its normal habits, arriving at the exact moment she described it in a dream. The psychiatrist was Carl Jung, and what happened in that room would become one of the most famous case studies in the history of psychology. The moment that convinced Jung something was happening in the world that neither religion nor science had adequate language for. He would eventually give it a name: synchronicity. Jung's patient, by his own account, was one of the most rigidly rational people he had ever treated. She approached everything, including her own inner life, through pure intellect, keeping her emotions at a careful, controlled distance. Jung had been struggling to reach her for some time. Her defenses were airtight, her rationalism impenetrable. And then the beetle arrived. Jung caught the insect, opened his hand, and said simply, "Here is your golden beetle." In that single moment, something in his patient's rigid worldview cracked open. The coincidence was so precise, so symbolically loaded, that it broke through a wall that months of conventional therapy hadn't been able to touch. Her treatment, Jung later wrote, genuinely began that day. Jung could have dismissed it as chance. Instead, he spent decades trying to understand what he had witnessed, and in doing so, developed one of his most controversial, most misunderstood, and most quietly influential ideas. It's worth being precise here, because synchronicity gets flattened online into simply meaning a cool coincidence. And that's not what Jung was describing. Jung defined synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence between an inner psychological state and an outer event, connected not by ordinary cause and effect, but by shared meaning. This is the key distinction. In the scarab case, the dream did not cause the beetle to appear, and the beetle did not cause the dream. There was no causal link joining them at all, and yet the two events were connected powerfully by meaning. Jung called this an acausal connecting principle, a way that events could relate to each other outside of the cause and effect framework that science normally relies on. Jung was not claiming this was supernatural or magical in a crude sense. He was making a more careful, more radical claim, that alongside causality, there might be another organizing principle at work in the universe, one built not on physical cause, but on meaning itself, and that this principle becomes visible precisely at moments when the unconscious mind is unusually activated, such as during deep emotional stress, major life transitions, or intense psychological work, like Jung's patient was undergoing in that very session. The scarab was not an isolated incident. Jung documented several other cases that shaped his thinking, and they reveal a consistent pattern. Synchronicities tended to cluster around moments of significant psychological transition, often involving death, major decisions, or breakthroughs in therapy. One of Jung's other well-known accounts involves a single day on which he encountered the image of a fish repeatedly in unrelated contexts, with no apparent connection between them. A fish served for lunch, a patient mentioning fish imagery in a dream, an unrelated visitor bringing up a fish motif, until by evening Jung had lost count of the recurrences. Taken individually, each incident meant nothing. Jung's point was that clustered together in a short span of time and coinciding with the symbolic weight fish imagery carried across mythology and religion, the pattern became something he could not simply file away as a random noise. Jung also documented instances involving his patients dreaming of a loved one's death shortly before receiving news of that death occurring, sometimes at nearly the same hour. He was careful in his writing not to claim these proved anything supernatural or prophetic. His interest was narrower and, in some ways, more unsettling, not proving the events were mystically connected, but taking seriously the psychological fact that the human mind, especially the unconscious, sometimes appears to organize itself around meaning in ways ordinary causality cannot account for. Here is the part of the story most people never hear, and it's what gives synchronicity far more intellectual weight than mystical coincidence usually carries. Jung did not develop this theory alone, in isolation from science. He developed it in close collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founding physicists of quantum mechanics, and eventually a Nobel Prize winner. Pauli came to Jung as a patient in the 1930s, in the midst of a personal crisis, and the two men developed an intense intellectual friendship that lasted the rest of their lives. Pauli was fascinated by the strange behavior of the quantum world, a domain where classical cause and effect seemed to break down at the smallest scales of reality, where particles behaved in ways that resisted the deterministic rules that had governed physics for centuries. Jung and Pauli spent years in correspondence, each pushing the other's thinking, and eventually co-published a book exploring whether the acausal principle Jung saw in the psyche and the acausal behavior Pauli saw in quantum physics might be pointing toward the same deeper structure of reality. Neither man claimed to have proven this, but the collaboration matters because it shows synchronicity wasn't simply folk mysticism dressed up in academic language. It was a serious, if unresolved, attempt by a psychiatrist and a physicist to ask whether meaning itself might be a real, if invisible, organizing force in the universe, operating alongside, not in place of, ordinary cause and effect. Synchronicity sits in an uncomfortable place, and it always has. Skeptics point out, reasonably, that the human mind is a pattern-detecting machine, wired by evolution to notice connections everywhere, including where none exist, a tendency psychologists call apophenia. Given enough coincidences in a lifetime, some will inevitably feel meaningful purely by chance, and our minds are far better at remembering the striking hits than the countless uneventful misses. Jung himself was aware of this criticism and never fully resolved it. He wasn't asking people to abandon causal, scientific thinking. He was asking whether an additional layer of experience, meaning arising unpredictably at moments of deep psychological significance, deserved serious attention rather than automatic dismissal. For Jung, the value of synchronicity was less about proving a metaphysical claim and more about what happens to a person when they take a meaningful coincidence seriously rather than shrugging it off. His patient's rationalism broke open, not because the beetle proved anything scientifically, but because she allowed herself, for the first time, to experience meaning without demanding it first pass through the filter of pure logic. This is, in some ways, the real center of the idea. Synchronicity asks whether a person is willing to notice when the world seems to be speaking to them symbolically, and what changes when they stop insisting that everything meaningful must also be provable. Whether or not synchronicity reflects something real about the structure of the universe, or simply something real about the structure of the human mind, Jung believed the two questions were less separate than they first appear. For Jung, the psyche was not a passive mirror reflecting an indifferent world. It was, in some sense, embedded in that world, and the boundary between inner and outer was far less solid than modern people assume. The scarab did not change the laws of physics. It changed a woman sitting in a chair at a moment when she was finally ready to be changed. Perhaps that is the real function synchronicity serves, whatever its ultimate cause. Not proof of a hidden order in the universe, but a doorway that opens, briefly, exactly when a person's inner world is ready to walk through it. Somewhere right now, a beetle is tapping against someone's window. A name is crossing someone's mind moments before the phone rings. A coincidence is arriving exactly on time. Most people will let it pass without a second thought. Jung's patient did not, and in the space of a single knock against the glass, an entire life quietly changed direction.